Well, the Cleveland Browns wasted no time making significant changes to the coaching staff following an incredibly disappointing, underwhelming 3-14 season, not even before the 1 p.m. kickoff. You heard of Black Monday before. Well, today, at least in Cleveland, it's Black Sunday because Ken Dorsey, the offensive coordinator, and Andy Dickerson, the new offensive line coach, well, they are both back in the unemployment line after being fired this morning by Kevin Stefanski and the Cleveland Browns. All right, so what does this mean? Let's unpack it, figure out what it means for Stefanski and for the rest of the staff moving forward, because I think today's moves, or this morning's moves, are quite telling about a number of situations as it pertains to the Cleveland Browns. First and foremost, Kevin Stefanski's safe. We can argue all day, all month, all year, whether or not that should be the right answer and the right approach for the Cleveland Browns. But the reality is, if Kevin Stefanski is firing coordinators the day after the final game of the season, to me, that is an incredibly strong indication that he will be back next season in charge of the Cleveland Browns. Is that the right move? Well, we'll get to that in a little bit because I see both sides of the coin on that argument. But if he's going to fire Ken Dorsey and Andy Dickerson, that's a pretty telltale sign that he will be the head coach of the Cleveland Browns in 2025. If he weren't going to be the head coach, then on Monday or this morning, the entire staff would have been fired. You wouldn't be seeing just coordinators be let go. You'd see the entire staff getting fired. So Stefanski, he's safe. Now, is that the right choice? Personally, I do not believe so. I think Kevin Stefanski is a good head coach who had a terrible 2024 season. But coming off a 3-14 season with an organization that has holes all across the board, I'm not sure it makes sense to bring back the head coach who commandeered this ship to a top 3 draft pick. Why? Because if the Browns start off next season 1-3, 1-4, 2-5, something like that, Stefanski is potentially going to be fired midseason. And I just think if there is an opportunity or a chance that Kevin Stefanski enters 2025 on the hot seat turned up to level 10, why go through with that process instead of staring it down and starting the complete rebuild over with a new head coach, a new general manager, a new quarterback, and a new core of a roster all around it? It doesn't make sense to me if the Browns, who say they're not going to go through an entire rebuild, which from a cap standpoint, I understand why they wouldn't do it. They have a ton of players tied to a lot of money that don't have a ton of trade value. So in their mind, it doesn't necessarily make sense to cater out. But if you don't believe you are truly a quarterback away from contending at the highest level, then what's the plan for next year if you're the Browns? And if you don't know what the plan is, why is Kevin Stefanski going to stick around to help figure out that plan? Wouldn't you want to bring in a new head coach with a new vision for this team to help you navigate those treacherous waters? Well, Jimmy Haslam has been criticized in the past for being too quick to pull the trigger on head coaches. And I would argue that despite he probably is a little bit too impatient, he's made the right choice every time. Now, you can argue he made the wrong choice in hiring the guys that he ended up having to fire, but none of the guys he fired that were considered too early firings have gone on to do anything really in the NFL outside of Cleveland. So I can see both sides of that, but to me, this firing of Ken Dorsey and this firing of Andy Dickerson indicate from the get-go that Kevin Stefanski will be safe next season. Let's talk about the Dorsey hiring, and then we'll get to the Dickerson hiring and firing. So Ken Dorsey was brought in after Stefanski let go of AVP last season. And Andy Dickerson was brought in after the Browns lost, and they didn't let go. They lost Bill Callahan to his son, Brian Callahan, and the Tennessee Titans. Isn't it ironic that those are the 3 teams that right now, if the season ended before these 2 teams played their last games, could have the first, second, and third picks in the NFL draft? I'm just pointing that out. It really means nothing because an assistant coach and a head coach only has so much control over a team's record, but it is kind of funny that the guys that we're considering these massive losses are also picking the top 3 of the 2025 NFL draft. So the Browns let go of AVP, and at the time, it felt a little weird because the Browns offense, despite having a carousel of quarterbacks last season, was relatively competent. They finished top 10 in points, top 16 in yards, so top half in the 2 most important metrics you could have for an offense. And yeah, they turned the ball over quite a bit. And sure, Deshaun Watson had his really good second half against Baltimore, but was kind of up and down before that. And they got the most out of Joe Flacco, and they still won games with PJ Walker. I understand it wasn't the most electric offense, but it certainly wasn't a bad offense. But for one reason or another, And to this day, we still don't exactly know who was the driving force in kicking AVP out and bringing in Ken Dorsey. I have my assumptions, but those are just assumptions. So, until we have some clarity, it's not even worth discussing. But for one reason or another, AVP was let go, and Ken Dorsey was the guy they hired. And when they hired Ken Dorsey, we all came on here. We came on Bleacher Report and said, this is an interesting fit. Ken Dorsey's known for a spread attack. He likes RPOs. He wants to spread the field, 4 or 5 receivers on the field at any given time. Let the quarterback make the reads. And essentially, when you peel back to coach speak, Ken Dorsey was brought in here to help elevate Deshaun Watson's game back to the quarterback the Browns thought they were trading for in 2022. Did that happen? No, not at all. Instead of elevating the offense and elevating Deshaun Watson, Deshaun had one of the worst statistical starts to a season any quarterback has ever had. And we're not going to dive into the numbers. Deshaun's not playing right now, so it doesn't really matter. But from a statistical and analytical standpoint, and even the eye test, it's one of the worst starts a quarterback has ever had to begin a season. Then they make the switch, and DTR gets a quick chance to be the quarterback. He gets hurt against Cincinnati. Jameis comes in, and for a couple of weeks, the offense looked competent. Started slinging the ball around left and right. Winston, 368 yards, 3 tutties against Baltimore in a win. Threw for nearly 400 yards, no turnovers against New Orleans. And then the turnover machine, Jameis's biggest weakness, came back to bite him in the you-know-what. And eventually they benched Jameis. They moved to DTR. The offense looked atrocious with DTR. And I hope DTR has a successful career doing something in life. I just don't anticipate it being an NFL quarterback because of all the quarterbacks I've seen play this season, he's right near the bottom. So you took an offense that last season was middle of the pack in yards per play, top 10 in points. And this season, they are bottom 3 in every offensive category that matters. Points, yards per game, yards per play, passing yards, rushing yards. The offense was abysmal. And it's not any one person's fault. It is not just Ken Dorsey's fault. It is not just Deshaun Watson's fault. It is not just Amari Cooper's fault early on. It is not just an offensive tackle's fault. It's a culmination of everything. And when you are in charge, as Ken Dorsey was, of improving an offensive unit and coming together and meshing and collecting 2 different offensive philosophies, the spread concepts that you are inherently educated in, and the West Coast offense that Kevin Stefanski has known and used to efficient results over the course of his NFL career, you were in charge of blending that into one superpowered offense. And instead, we got one of the worst in the history of the Cleveland Browns. And that's saying a lot. So Ken Dorsey was shown the door today, and I don't think anybody in Browns Nation has an issue with it. And I'm quickly trying to look at the comments as they come in, and I appreciate everyone for tuning in here. I am yet to see a comment that says firing Dorsey was a mistake. I see one comment from Captain Dan real quick who says, Dorsey was a colossal mistake. Look at the proof in the pudding, a.k.a. the hiring of him was the mistake to begin with. And I tend to agree with that. I didn't necessarily think they had to deviate away from what had worked in Stefanski's system. I understand why. You paid a ton of money and a ton of assets to get Deshaun Watson. You want to elevate him into the quarterback you thought you were acquiring, but didn't pan out. Let's look at the other coaching hire and firing that happened this morning. Andy Dickerson was brought in from the Seattle Seahawks after Bill Callahan left the Brown staff to go join his son's staff in Tennessee. Now, from the get-go, the Browns' offensive line was an absolute travesty this season. It was. This was a unit that we thought could be top 5 in the league in terms of the best offensive lines in football. Jed Wills, in the 5th year of his rookie deal, prove-it deal, he had to step up, but he was coming off injury. Over at right tackle, you had Jack Conklin, a proven veteran, a former All-Pro in this league, coming off injury. On the interior, you had Ethan Pochich, Wyatt Teller, and Joel Bitonio, 3 of the better interior pass blockers and run blockers in all of football. And somehow, despite having the same guys, if not more talent on the offensive line than the Browns had last year due to injuries, the unit took a giant step back. And we work with, on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, a bunch of guys who played in the NFL. And I've asked them multiple times, how much influence does a position coach have on the play of a certain unit? So how much of an influence does the offensive line coach have on the offensive line? And Tyvis Powell, who played at Ohio State, won a national championship there, and then played in the league for 4 years, said, they have a good amount of impact, but at the end of the day, it's the defensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator, and the head coach who truly are the ones that are developing these groups. But the offensive line coach is the guy who's there to help fine-tune your technique and give you these little tips and tricks and help find stuff on tape that you may have missed that can give you an advantage on Sundays. So my question is, what advantage did Andy Dickerson give these guys throughout the season? And what little tips and techniques did we see the Browns get better at this year than they were in the previous 2 seasons? And frankly, where was the development of any of these guys? I could argue that every single offensive lineman on the Browns this season took a step back and regressed from where they were last year. That's inexcusable for a team that has a young tackle in DeJuan Jones, who was super promising as a rookie. And he had his moments in his sophomore season before getting injured, but we thought he was ready to take that leap. He did not take that leap. Same with Zach Zinter, who did not look and did not appear ready for the spotlight in his rookie season. And then it came out a few weeks ago that Mike Vrabel had been the de facto offensive line coach for the last quarter plus of the season. So did they silently fire Andy Dickerson 3-4 weeks ago and just didn't announce it? Maybe. If Mike Vrabel's now running the offensive line meetings and he's working with DeJuan Jones one-on-one, and now he's traveling to a road games, which he hadn't previously because some of the offensive linemen had requested Vrabel make the trip. What's up with that? And then on the first episode of the AFC Hard Knocks on HBO, you saw the offensive line coach cussing out the Browns offensive line at a team meeting. You're not cussing him out, but he used a ton of explicitives that we are not going to say on this family-friendly Bleacher Report program, trying to motivate them in the classroom. Well, it turns out that's not Andy Dickerson. That was not the head offensive line coach. That was Roy Estevan, his assistant. So if Andy Dickerson isn't leading the meetings for the offensive line, and if Mike Vrabel has been anointed the de facto offensive line coach while Andy Dickerson's still on staff, what was he doing? I don't know. It beats the heck out of me. Sounds like a lot of dysfunction going on inside Berea once again. So to no one's surprise, Andy Dickerson was let go this morning. Him and Ken Dorsey on their way out. Those are the first two. And the fact that it happened so quickly after the final game is quite telling, because if you guys remember, just 3 years ago or 2 years ago now, we were begging Kevin Stefanski to move on from Mike Prefer and Joe Woods, his special teams coordinator and his defensive coordinator. And that decision did not come on the traditional Black Monday, the day after the final game of the season. And it did not come, frankly, for a few days. And even in one case, a few weeks after the season. So the fact Kevin Stefanski, who's been criticized in the past for not being decisive enough with his coaching spots and making necessary changes when needed, the fact that he was ready, he didn't wait till Monday. Hell, the plane barely landed. They played yesterday afternoon before the plane touched ground in Cleveland. He had already made some staff changes. That tells me, and maybe I'm just putting puzzle pieces together, that he was never a fan of hiring Dorsey in the first place. Obviously, there's nothing you can do about Callahan. He wanted to go join his son's coaching staff. I totally understand that. That's not on Stefanski. But the firing of AVP and the hiring of Dorsey looks a little more suspicious and fishy than it had in the past. So what's next? Is Bubba Ventrone safe? I could see it either way. I tend to believe he is safe. If he wasn't fired this morning, why would you spread out the firings of assistant coaches? Maybe they wanted to just evaluate the offensive staff first, then they'll move to the defensive staff and then special teams. We'll see, but my gut tells me at this point, Bubba Ventrone is safe as the Browns special teams coordinator. Jim Schwartz, I do believe, will be safe as the Browns defensive coordinator, but there are going to be a couple of other assistant coaches on the offensive staff who I would not be shocked to see their time with the Cleveland Browns come to an end as well. Deuce Staley, who I loved to hire last year, I didn't think the running backs looked particularly good this season. I thought the run game scheme, which he's a part of, was lackluster and lacked a lot of detail. That goes hand in hand with the offensive line play not being nearly as good as it should have been, but I think he's on the hot seat. I think Chad O'Shea, the wide receivers coach, he's certainly on the hot seat. We did see Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman make some progression this year, but overall, over the course of his tenure as the Browns receivers coach, the group simply hasn't been good enough. And then you look at some of the other assistants. I can't tell you exactly what they do on a day-to-day basis. So I'm not quite sure who's coming and going, but I do know this. Kevin Stefanski is going to be on the hot seat entering 2025. If the Browns don't get off to a good start next season, it's going to be cranked up to a 10. His seat will be like when you get in your car in the middle of the winter and you have leather seats and you got to punch up the seat warmers to 3 levels just to feel something again. That's the level of hot seat Kevin Stefanski will be sitting on to start the season. And then it gets cranked up. And what scares me is if the Browns start off the season poorly, then we're looking at a coaching change midway through. That's not how you want to start a year. I don't like it. But from the other perspective, if I'm Kevin Stefanski, I now know what I have to do to continue being the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. And if I'm going to start a season on the hot seat, knowing that this could potentially be my last year here, despite signing an extension last summer, I'm going down with my guys. I'm going down with my offense. And I'm going down with my quarterback. Now, for the quarterback question, I can't answer who that's going to be. My gut tells me Kirk Cousins is going to end up a Cleveland Brown and will be in competition with Deshaun Watson and a second, third, fourth round pick rookie to be the starting quarterback next year. I do not believe the Browns will draft a quarterback in the top 3 this season. I believe Kevin Stefanski is going to end up hiring an offensive coordinator, either someone currently on the staff, a la Tommy Rees, or going to get a guy that he worked with previously in one of his stops in Minnesota or before that, or someone who is the son of someone he's worked with in the past, a la Clint Kubiak, the current offensive coordinator of the New Orleans Saints. If I'm Stefanski, I'm taking the play calling back. I'm running my offense. I am doing everything I can to do what I believe, as Kevin Stefanski believe, is going to win football games. I do not care how ugly it is. I do not care if we win 3-2 every game. I do not care if we win 55-54. I got to put some damn wins together and put together a winning season, or I am not going to have a job very long with the Cleveland Browns. To do that, I'm going back to my roots. You know, when your back's up against the wall, you can only trust the guys that, trust blood, trust family. I feel like that's the position Kevin Stefanski's in now. And last year, he had what I believe an offensive coordinator forced upon him by people above him on the power chain. And that's not going to happen again. I do not think Kevin Stefanski would sign off on that again. I think he's going to bring in someone he believes is the right fit, a guy he believes can help elevate some of the players on this team and can help him see little parts of his offense that maybe he hasn't grown with, that they have, that can mesh together. I looked at the Dorsey-Stefanski pairing last year as oil and water. Yeah, they could both fit in a cylinder together, but it's never going to integrate and mesh cleanly. There's always going to be some visible differentiation between offense A and offense B. You can't be an under-center play-action team when you want to be in a spread formations at a shotgun. It doesn't work. So if I'm Stefanski, and I'll say this one last time before we wrap up here, I am going down and I am on a sinking ship with the people I choose to be on that sinking ship with. Because when push comes to shove, these are the guys that are also going to go to war for me. And our collective thinking from an offensive standpoint can hopefully put whatever quarterback we get in here in the best position to succeed. That's it. If it doesn't happen, he gone anyway. So if you're going to go down, you might as well go down with your guys, your quarterback, your offense. Take play calling back. Hire someone you trust. Hire someone who is willing to work within your system and your scheme. And don't let anyone take your eyes off the prize, because the Browns' prize next year is simple. Win, keep your job. Lose, you're back in the unemployment line with Ken Dorsey and Andy Dickerson. Appreciate you tuning into this Bleacher Report impromptu Sunday stream. All the action kicks off at 1 o'clock. You can find post-game reaction, all the games on the Bleacher Report app. If you like what you saw today, check me out on Twitter at Mike Lucas TV. They call me Mikey McNuggets on the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. And I appreciate every single one of you guys for tuning in today. Enjoy your Sunday, and we'll see you in the playoffs. Peace.